Hi, this is Donna with Sparrowstudios7. We were just reading Genesis 10, so I'm going to bring you the I Read and I Learn Genesis 10 commentary. If you saw my last video where I read Genesis 10, you would see that I was being pissed and Feeney wanted some of it. So it has now been safely consumed, and he did not get all of it, I assure you. So now on to some serious stuff with Genesis 10. So this is the account of Noah's and basically the breakdown of the ancient world through Noah's descendants, the sons and daughters of Shem, Ham, and Japheth after the flood. So the first note I'm going to read actually covers 10:1 through 11:9, so it gives you a bit of foreshadowing about what we're going to read tomorrow, but this is what my Bible says on the topic. Okay, so the fifth account in Genesis unites the Table of Nations and the Babel story, or the Babel story, around the theme of scattering the nations. The Table of Nations precedes the Babel story, even though the Babel incident caused the geopolitical situation reflected in the Table of Nations. By reversing the order, Genesis links the repopulation of the earth with the blessing confirmed upon Noah and his sons, and shows that Abram's call was God's solution to the problem of human estrangement from God as reflected in the Babel story. So, the problem with this note is that you don't know anything yet, unless you went to Sunday school, about the Tower of Babel. We're talking about that tomorrow. In short, just to give you a little bit of heads up, people got prideful, and they decided that they were going to build a tower to reach God. In short, that did not sit well with God, because he is the almighty creator of all things and does not like pride. So instead of letting them finish their project, he sent angels down to confuse their languages, essentially causing a diaspora or major exodus from that spot, and the nations all spread out because they had to find people who could actually understand them, and that became the new world post the flood. And after the descendants of Noah had kids. So that is a little bit of foreshadowing about tomorrow. So in chapter 10, there are a whole bunch of names. And in my Bible, I have some specific notes about this passage, as well as some of the notes on the different names of the people. I'm going to try to find some ones that are good for you guys in real time. So I'm going to read the first one about Genesis 10:2 through 32 first, because I think it's going to give us some more information about the people themselves and what the nations of the ancient world look like before the Tower of Babel, but after the flood. This section describes the ancestral origin of the nations of the ancient Near East. Ham was at the center, while the descendants of Japheth and Shem spread out to the surrounding regions of Greece, Crete, Asia Minor, Mesopotamia, Madai, the Arabian Peninsula, and northeast Africa. The list selectively highlights nations relevant to Israel. With a total of 70 times 7 names indicates completeness. See Genesis 46:27 and Deuteronomy 32:8. and symbolizes the totality of the world, which later would be blessed by the descendants of Abraham. That's going to be in Genesis 18:18. Although Shem is mentioned first in Genesis 10:1, he is addressed last in the table because of his connection to Abram. We see this in verses 21 through 31 of this verse, and in the next chapter, chapter 11, 10 through 32, and in chapter 12, verse 1. Although God established all of the nations, Israel was his special creation, a microcosm of 70 people called to be a blessing to a world of 70 nations. And we see that God established all the boundaries of the nations. We find it in Deuteronomy 32:8, Amos 9:7, and Acts 17:26. Okay, so I'm going to specifically talk about Shem next because of what that note was talking about. So, here we go. Shem, the older brother of Japheth, talking about Genesis 10:21 here, was the father of the Semitic peoples. The descendants listed represent countries east of Israel, modern Iraq, Iran, and Syria. The narrator lists these locations within Mesopotamia, since Abram, the father of Israel, originated from this area. We see that in the next chapter, 11:27 through 32. Eber received special attention because of his connection with Abram. He was the son of Shelah. In verse 24. Okay, so the descendants of Elam we see in 10:22 lived in the region of modern southwestern Iran. We see this in Genesis 14:1, 9, and Ezra 4:9, and Isaiah 11:11. The descendants of Asher were later Assyrians, who lived under Nimrod's jurisdiction. Sumerians descended from Ham were ousted by Mesopotamian Semites. Arphaxad possibly settled northeast of Nineveh. His descendants are further described in chapter 11:12 through 26. Lud was near the Tigris River. Its people were related to the Lydians. Aram was a kingdom of tribes that lived in the Mesopotamian plains. And then it continues all throughout, talking about more about the different descendants of Shem. I'm going to go back and talk quickly about Japheth and Ham. So the 7 sons of Japheth, going back to 10:2, settled in the region of Anatolia, the western plateau plains of Turkey, and spoke Indo-European languages. Gomer was the ancestor of the later Cimmerians who lived north of the Black Sea. Magog was probably the ancestor of those who settled in the region of Lydia, which is mentioned in Ezekiel 38:2. The descendants of Madai were later the Medes of northwest Iran. We see this in 2 Kings 17:6, Jeremiah 51:11, and Dan 5:28. The descendants of Javan were later the Ionian Greeks. And then it continues on, but I'm going to jump over to Ham quickly. So it says, the territory of Canaan is specifically marked off in 10:19. because the inhabitants were taken and given to Israel.